His wife told him good luck being homeless, and he smiled. Not because he was unbothered, not because he didn't feel it. He smiled because he knew something she didn't, something her mother didn't, something the man she'd chosen to replace him with was about to find out the hard way, because the quiet man they had all spent years deciding was worth nothing, the man they put on the porch with his bags and their laughter, was holding $20.7 million in equity in a company that was about to become everyone's problem. They called him broke. They called him small. They staged his removal like a performance, with an audience and everything, like humiliating him in front of the people who mattered most to her would make it more permanent. What they didn't know was that permanence was already decided, just not in the direction they thought. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He picked up his own bags, walked to his car, and smiled once on the way out. And 6 weeks later, his wife stood on a rooftop in downtown Atlanta and watched a helicopter land, and watched him step out of it. What happens when the man you dismissed as nothing turns out to own everything that mattered? If you already know this one is going to be good, go ahead and tap that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. And if you are new here, subscribe so you never miss a story. These drop every week and they do not disappoint. And before we go any further, drop your city in the comments. Where are you watching from today? I want to see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to where this all started. To a Saturday morning in Atlanta, to a kitchen that still smelled like fresh coffee, and to a man who had already decided he was never going to say another word he didn't mean. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and a Saturday that had not yet decided what it wanted to be. Raymond Okafor had been up since 6, the way he always was, moving through the house in the early quiet, like a man who understood that the best part of any day was the part before it asked anything of you. He had the percolator going on the back burner, the one Denise said was too old and too slow, and he was standing at the counter with both hands wrapped around a mug, watching the light come up gold over the backyard fence. He heard the front door first. Not Denise coming downstairs, the front door opening from outside with a key, the way someone enters a place they have already decided belongs to them. Miss Claudette came in first. She was wearing her good church coat, the camel-coloured one she saved for occasions that required an audience. Behind her came Tamara, Denise's oldest sister, already scanning the room with the particular expression of a woman who has been looking forward to something for a long time. Then Bria, the youngest, who said nothing and positioned herself near the doorway like she was blocking an exit she assumed someone might try. Denise came in last and stood in the center of the kitchen like she had rehearsed where to stand. Raymond set his mug down. He did not say good morning. He looked at the 4 of them arranged in his kitchen on a Saturday before 8 o'clock, and he understood, with the calm clarity of a man who had learned not to be surprised by anything, exactly what kind of morning this was going to be. Denise did not waste time with preamble. She told him the divorce was not something that was going to happen eventually. She told him it was happening today. She told him his bags were already packed and waiting upstairs, that she had done it herself the night before, that she had been planning this for longer than he probably realized, and that she needed him out of the house before noon. Raymond did not move. Miss Claudette took that stillness as an invitation. She stepped forward with the particular authority of a woman who had spent 40 years in school administration and knew how to deliver a verdict to someone sitting across a desk. She told Raymond that Denise deserved better. She did not say it cruelly. She said it the way you say something that is simply obviously medically, true. She said a woman like Denise had needs that a man drawing a salary like a line worker was never going to meet. She said she had watched Raymond for years, and she had never once seen him build anything, reach for anything, or become anything more than exactly what he appeared to be. She said Denise had been patient long enough. Tamara nodded. Bria studied her fingernails. Raymond looked at Miss Claudette for a long moment. He did not answer her. He picked his mug back up, finished what was left in it, set it in the sink, and turned off the percolator. Then he walked upstairs. His bags were exactly where Denise said they would be. 2 duffel bags and a rolling suitcase lined up outside the bedroom door, packed neatly, nothing forgotten. He looked at them for a moment. Then he picked them up, one by one, and carried them down the stairs himself. He did not ask for help. He did not look at Denise's family as he moved through the kitchen toward the front door. He made 2 trips. The morning air outside was soft and already warm, the kind of spring morning in Atlanta that made the whole city smell like something newly washed. Raymond carried the last bag to his car and loaded it into the trunk and closed the hatch, and stood there a moment with his hand resting on the metal. He heard Denise behind him on the porch. She had followed him outside, and he could tell from the way she said his name that her mother and sisters were still in the doorway watching, because her voice had the particular projection of someone performing for people standing just inside a door. She told him good luck being homeless. She said it like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Raymond did not turn around immediately. He looked up, the way a man does when he is not looking for anything in particular, and that was when he saw it. Above the roofline of the house across the street, just barely visible, the dark shape of a helicopter moved through the pale morning sky. It was moving slowly. It did not hurry. It crossed from one edge of the roofline to the other, and then it was gone. Raymond watched it until it disappeared. Then he turned around. Denise was standing on the top porch step with her arms crossed and her chin lifted, and her family was framed in the doorway behind her, like a portrait of a verdict already rendered. Raymond smiled. It was a small smile. Private. The kind that does not need an audience. Denise's eyes narrowed. She asked him what exactly he thought was funny. He looked at her a moment longer. Then he said, "Nothing." He said, "Go on." He got in his car. He adjusted the mirror. He pulled out of the driveway at the same unhurried pace he had carried those bags, and he drove down the street without looking back. Raymond Okafor had never once smiled without a reason. The women in the doorway did not know that yet, but they would. To understand Raymond Okafor, you had to understand his father first. Clifton Okafor spent 22 years as a freight dispatcher for a mid-sized trucking company out of East Point, Georgia, a man who knew every route, every rate, every regulation, and never once saw his name on anything more substantial than a pay stub. He died of a heart attack at 51, leaving behind a used pickup truck, a small life insurance policy, and a son who had watched him work himself into the ground for a company that replaced him within 2 weeks. Raymond was 19 years old. He went to the funeral in a borrowed suit and came home understanding something that would quietly govern every decision he made for the rest of his life. It was not enough to work for something. You had to own something. His grandmother, Ida Reese Okafor, already knew this. She had owned her house on Donnelly Avenue outright since 1974, paid it off on a housekeeper's wages over 12 years, and kept the deed in a fireproof lockbox under her bed alongside her Bible and her property tax receipts. She told Raymond that paper was the only thing that didn't lie. People lied, handshakes lied, a deed didn't lie, a contract didn't lie. Raymond listened to her the way young men listen to grandmothers who have proven their point with their lives. completely and without argument. He graduated from Georgia State in 2001 with a degree in operations management and spent 2 years learning the freight industry from the inside out, the same way his father had, but with different intentions. In 2003, he sat down with 2 men he had met in a supply chain elective, Darius Cole, who could sell a concept to a room in under 10 minutes, and Jerome Whitfield, who understood systems the way some men understood music. They pooled $11,000 between them, borrowed the basement of Greater Hope Baptist Church in Vine City on Tuesday and Thursday evenings and started making calls. They called the company Skybridge Logistics Solutions. Darius put his face on everything. Jerome built the routing architecture. Raymond ran the operations, the contracts, the compliance filings, the vendor relationships, the unglamorous machinery that kept the whole thing moving. He was the part of the company that nobody saw and everybody needed. While Darius was shaking hands at industry mixers and Jerome was optimizing delivery windows, Raymond was in the back reading terms and negotiating rates and making sure every agreement they signed was documented down to the last clause. By 2007, Skybridge had outgrown the church basement and moved to a proper office in Vine City. By 2009, they had 40 employees and $8.2 million in annual revenue. The 3 of them had built something real, something documented, something that belonged to them on paper in a way that Clifton Okafor's 22 years of labor never had. Raymond was 32 years old and worth more money than his father had made in his entire lifetime, and almost nobody knew it. That summer, at a cookout in Collier Heights, hosted by a mutual friend, Raymond met Denise Rivers. She was wearing a yellow dress and laughing at something her sister said, and Raymond thought she was the most certain person he had ever seen in a social setting, like she had already decided the room and everyone in it. He introduced himself. She asked what he did. He told her he worked in logistics, that he was an operations manager at a freight company. He did not say he co-founded it. She did not ask. They dated for 2 years. They married in the spring of 2011 in a ceremony at her family's church, with Miss Claudette Rivers seated in the front row in a cream-colored hat that cost more than Raymond's first month's salary at his first job after college. The reception was at a banquet hall in Buckhead, and Raymond paid for half of it without mentioning that he had done so. That same year, the Skybridge board executed a shareholder lock-up agreement, standard practice for a growing private company protecting its equity structure from outside scrutiny. The agreement bound all 3 co-founders to a 10-year non-disclosure of their equity positions and a prohibition on liquidation without unanimous board consent. Raymond signed it without ceremony. It was good governance. It was the kind of paperwork his grandmother would have approved of. Denise was not mentioned in the agreement. Denise had never asked about it. Denise, as far as Raymond could determine, had never thought to wonder whether the operations manager she married had anything more to his name than his salary and his sensible car. The first family dinner at Miss Claudette's house was Thanksgiving of that year. The table was full and loud, the kind of noise that comes from a family that has a lot of opinions and considers silence a form of weakness. There was candied yams and cornbread dressing, and a turkey that Miss Claudette announced she had been preparing since Wednesday. At some point between the blessing and the dessert, Miss Claudette turned to Raymond with a smile that was warm on the surface and surgical underneath, and she asked him directly, in front of everyone at the table, what exactly he owned. Raymond looked at her. He thought about the signed agreement in Patricia Hargrove's file cabinet. He thought about his 34%. He smiled at Miss Claudette the same way he had smiled at Denise on the porch that morning. Private, patient, already knowing something the room did not. He told her he was still building. She nodded like that confirmed everything she had already decided. and Raymond built his marriage the same way he had built his company, without announcements, without explanations, without asking anyone's permission to be exactly what he already was. The contempt did not arrive all at once. It built the way water damage builds, slowly, invisibly, until one day you press your hand against the wall and the whole thing gives. Miss Claudette set the tone at that first Thanksgiving and never deviated from it. Every holiday dinner after that followed the same pattern, as reliable as a church calendar. There would be good food and loud conversation, and at some point, always, the subject of Raymond's career would surface like something that had been waiting just below the table. Miss Claudette never attacked directly, but she was too precise for that. She asked questions, she made observations. She mentioned Denise's cousin Paulette's husband, a man named Gregory, who had started a commercial HVAC company in Marietta and was apparently doing very well for himself. She mentioned how Paulette had just bought a house in Stone Mountain with 4 bedrooms and a 2-car garage. She mentioned these things while passing the sweet potatoes in the warm voice of a woman who was simply sharing family news. The message was always the same. Raymond was not Gregory. Raymond would never be Gregory. Tamara and Bria absorbed the lesson the way younger siblings absorb everything from their mother, completely and without questioning the source. By the 3rd year of the marriage, they had stopped asking Raymond about his work at all. He became background furniture at family gatherings, present, accounted for, unremarkable. Denise absorbed it differently. It took longer with her, and Raymond watched it happen the way you watch a season change, not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of small shifts. She stopped bringing up his name when she talked about household finances with her sisters. She started describing their life together in terms of what she provided, her organizational skills, her social connections, her instinct for how things should look. Raymond featured in these descriptions the way a supporting wall features in a renovation plan. Necessary, but not the point. She started saying his salary was just enough. She said it casually at first, to Bria on the phone, not knowing Raymond was in the next room reading the paper. Just enough. The phrase sat in Raymond's chest like a stone he decided not to pick up. He let it stay there. He went to work. He came home. He attended his quarterly Skybridge board meetings, the ones Denise had long since filed away in her mind as team check-ins at the logistics company where her husband processed freight records and managed shift schedules. She never asked what a board meeting was for a company with no board. He never offered. Brandon Fitch entered the picture in the summer of 2022 through Bria at a corporate mixer for mid-level Atlanta professionals held at a rooftop venue in Midtown. Bria called Denise the next morning with the kind of urgency she reserved for news she considered important. She said she had met someone Denise absolutely needed to know. She said he was in distribution, that he had presence, that he wore his suits like they belonged to him rather than the other way around. Raymond heard that phone call too. He was in the kitchen making coffee. He heard the word presence and said nothing. Brandon was a senior procurement officer at Helicopt Distribution, one of the larger freight clients in the Atlanta corridor. He had the kind of job that came with a corporate card and a title that sounded substantial at cocktail parties without requiring anyone to ask too many follow-up questions. He drove a leased vehicle. He took Denise to dinner at restaurants that appeared in magazine lists. He talked about deals and relationships and leverage the way men do when they have learned that the vocabulary of power can substitute for its substance. Denise began coming home later. Not dramatically at first. 30 minutes, an hour. The texture of the marriage changed the way a piece of fabric changes when you pull a single thread. The shape stays, but something in it is no longer quite right. Raymond noticed. He noticed the way he noticed everything, quietly, completely, and without announcement. He continued to draw his $67,000 salary. He continued to attend his quarterly board meetings. In the fall of 2023, he sat in the Skybridge boardroom in Buckhead and voted alongside Darius and Jerome to approve the acquisition of a corporate aviation division, 2 executive helicopters, an operations manager for the fleet, and a discretionary access policy for board members. He signed the resolution on a Tuesday afternoon and drove home in his sensible car and made dinner and ate it alone because Denise said she had a work thing running late. By early 2024, Skybridge Logistics Solutions carried a valuation of $61 million. Raymond's 34% stake was worth $20.7 million on paper. The lock-up agreement that had bound him to silence had expired 5 years earlier. He had simply never found a reason to update anyone. Denise filed for divorce in March of 2024. She did it through an attorney, formally, and her paperwork described Raymond in the financial disclosure section as a salaried employee with no significant assets. She was so certain of it. That was the thing Raymond would think about later. Not the cruelty of it, but the certainty. The complete, comfortable certainty of a woman who had spent 9 years deciding who her husband was and had never once considered the possibility that she had decided wrong. She was about to reconsider. On the Monday morning after he walked off that porch, Raymond Okafor got in his car and drove to Midtown Atlanta, to a building on Peachtree Street where a woman named Patricia Hargrove had been keeping his full financial picture in a locked filing cabinet for 11 years, waiting for the day he decided he needed it. That day had arrived. Patricia Hargrove's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Street where everything was quiet and deliberate. The carpet, the lighting, the way the receptionist asked Raymond to take a seat as though she already knew he would not be waiting long. He had called Patricia on Saturday evening, 2 hours after leaving the porch. She had answered on the second ring, listened to 4 sentences, and said to come in Monday at 9. That was all. No questions, no reassurances, no theatre. Just the efficient response of a woman who had been doing this long enough to know when a situation had arrived at its moment. Raymond arrived at 8:55. Patricia was already at her desk when he walked in, a legal pad in front of her and a folder to the right that Raymond recognized. Navy blue, tabbed, the same one she had been updating for 11 years. She poured him coffee from the carafe on the credenza without asking whether he wanted any. She set it in front of him and sat down and opened the folder. She told him they should start with where things stood. She laid it out the way she laid out everything, in order, without drama, as though she were reading from a blueprint rather than describing the life of a man who had just been told good luck being homeless by the woman he had spent 13 years with. His position was this: 34% equity in Skybridge Logistics Solutions, a company currently valued at $61 million by the most recent independent assessment conducted the previous October. The shareholder lock-up agreement he had signed in 2011 had carried a rolling 10-year non-disclosure and non-liquidation clause. That agreement had expired in 2019. His shares had been fully liquid and actionable for 5 years. He had simply never done anything with them. His stake was worth $20.7 million. Raymond already knew the number. He had known it since the October valuation report. But hearing Patricia say it out loud, in that measured voice in that quiet room, it landed differently than it had on the page. It landed like something being set down after a very long time of being carried. Patricia moved to the second item without pausing. She told him that as a standard pre-filing procedure, her office had conducted a conflict of interest scan on all parties connected to the divorce. What they found was not what they were looking for, but it was significant. A man named Brandon Fitch, currently employed as a senior procurement officer at Helicopt Distribution, had spent the previous 18 months as one of Skybridge's most vocal internal advocates at that company. Helicopt was Skybridge's third largest client, representing $4.4 million in annual contract revenue. Brandon Fitch had championed that vendor relationship internally without disclosing that he had a personal involvement with the spouse of one of Skybridge's principal equity holders. That was a compliance problem. It was, Patricia noted, a significant compliance problem. Raymond was quiet for a long moment after she finished. He set his coffee down. He looked at the folder and then at the window and then back at Patricia. He asked her 2 questions. The first was how long a formal conflict of interest disclosure review would take to initiate. The second was who filed it. Patricia looked at him the way she always looked at him when he asked a question she had been expecting, directly, without softening it. She told him the disclosure would go to Halcourt's compliance department. It was standard governance procedure on Skybridge's part, a client relationship flag triggered by the discovery of an undisclosed personal entanglement between a client's employee and a vendor's equity principal. The filing itself was procedural. It did not name a motive. It did not have to. And Raymond filed it. As a board member and equity holder, the filing was entirely within his rights. It would reach Halcourt's compliance office within 24 hours of submission. After that, it would take approximately 10 days to become someone's problem. Raymond looked at her. Patricia said it again with the slight emphasis of a woman who understood exactly what she was saying. 10 days to become someone's problem. Raymond understood. He sat with it for another moment. Not processing, not deciding, but arriving at something he had already known since Saturday morning. The pieces had always been there. Every single one of them. The lock-up agreement in her cabinet. The equity no one had ever asked him about. The client contract that Brandon Fitch had been nurturing on behalf of a company he did not know Raymond co-owned. The whole architecture of it had been standing for years, waiting for Raymond to decide to walk through it. He told Patricia to file the divorce response and the disclosure simultaneously. He told her to include his full asset disclosure in the divorce filing: equity stake, board position, aviation access, the Southwest Atlanta property held in the family LLC, everything. Itemized and documented, the way his grandmother had always trusted paperwork over people. Patricia made a note on the legal pad. Then she closed the folder. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Raymond took the elevator down to the lobby and walked out onto Peachtree Street into the Atlanta morning, the sun already high and warm the way it gets in April when the city has made up its mind about spring. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment with his hands in his pockets. And he smiled. The same smile. He did not move fast after that. He moved precisely. He got in his car and he made one phone call to a man who had known him for 21 years, who had stood next to him in a church basement in Vine City with $3,600 and a routing spreadsheet and an idea. Darius Cole picked up before the second ring. Darius Cole listened to the whole thing without interrupting. That was one of the things Raymond had always respected about him. 21 years of building something together, and Darius had never once lost the ability to be still when stillness was what the moment required. He sat across from Raymond in the Skybridge boardroom in Buckhead, a room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a long oak table that had not existed when they were working off folding chairs in a church basement, and he listened to every word Raymond said without moving his pen, without nodding, without asking a single question until Raymond was done. Raymond laid it out the same way Patricia had laid it out to him, in order, without drama, the divorce filing, the financial discovery process that was coming, the Helicopt connection, Brandon Fitch's 18 months of procurement advocacy on behalf of a vendor whose co-founder he had been working to replace in his personal life. When Raymond finished, Darius was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Jerome Whitfield, who was sitting to Raymond's left with his arms folded and an expression on his face that was not quite anger and not quite satisfaction, but something that lived in the space between the two. Darius said 2 words, "Call the vote." Jerome seconded it without being asked. The board of Skybridge Logistics Solutions voted unanimously that afternoon to initiate a formal client relationship disclosure review covering all active vendor relationships where a potential conflict of interest had been identified. The language was precise, procedural, and entirely unremarkable as a governance matter. It named no individuals, it assigned no blame. It simply noted that the company's compliance obligations required the disclosure be filed with the relevant client's compliance department within 5 business days. The relevant client was Helicopt Distribution. Raymond signed the resolution last, the way he signed everything, deliberately, without ceremony. Patricia filed the disclosure notice the following morning. It was 3 pages long. It was addressed to Helicopt Distribution's Corporate Compliance Office. It was procedural, time-stamped, and completely devastating in the specific way that only a piece of entirely legitimate paperwork can be. It described, in the clinical language of corporate governance, the existence of a personal relationship between a Helicopt employee and a principal equity holder at a key vendor, a relationship that had not been disclosed during the period in which that employee had been actively championing the vendor's contracts internally. Brandon Fitch would have no idea it existed until it was already sitting on someone's desk. That same week, Patricia filed Raymond's formal response to the divorce petition. It was the first legal document in the entire proceeding that contained Raymond's complete financial picture, and it was thorough in a way that Denise's legal team was not prepared for. The filing listed Raymond's 34% equity stake in Skybridge Logistics Solutions, valued at $20.7 million as of the most recent independent assessment. It listed his position as a co-founder and active board member. It listed his discretionary access to the company's aviation assets. It listed the Southwest Atlanta property held in a family LLC since 2017, a fully renovated 3-bedroom on a quiet street in the neighborhood where his grandmother had once kept her deed in a fireproof lockbox. He had never mentioned that property to Denise. She had never asked. Patricia sent the filing on a Thursday. Denise's attorney received it on a Friday afternoon, at 4:50 in the evening, when most people had already mentally left the work week behind. The attorney read it once, then read it again. Then she called her paralegal and asked her to stay. Raymond, meanwhile, was settling into the Southwest Atlanta house for the first time as his primary residence. It was quieter than Cascade Heights. The street smelled like cut grass and something frying in a neighbor's kitchen, and there was a porch with 2 chairs that had been there since he bought the place and had never once been used. He sat in one of them that evening and ate a plate of food he had made himself and watched the neighborhood go about its Friday the way neighborhoods do, children on bikes, a couple walking a dog, the particular unhurried texture of a community that did not need to perform itself for anyone. He was not thinking about Denise. He was thinking about the board dinner the following Tuesday, a quarterly Skybridge event at a restaurant in Midtown, the kind of dinner that had always been on his calendar, and that Denise had always believed was a team check-in at the freight company where her husband managed operations. He arrived at the dinner by helicopter. It was the first time he had used his discretionary board access to the aviation division since the acquisition had been approved. He had no particular reason to make a point of it. It was simply the most direct route from Southwest Atlanta to a rooftop landing area 2 blocks from the restaurant, and Raymond had long since stopped making decisions based on how they might appear to people who were not in a position to understand them. By the end of that week, every piece was in its place. The disclosure notice was sitting in Helicopt compliance queue, waiting to be processed Monday morning. The divorce response was in Denise's attorney's file, waiting to be read over the weekend by a woman who was going to have a very different kind of Sunday than she expected. The aviation division had Raymond's name on its access roster. The Southwest Atlanta house had fresh coffee in the cabinet and a deadbolt that only Raymond had the key to. He had done nothing illegal, nothing aggressive, nothing that any reasonable person, in any court, in any boardroom, could characterize as anything other than a man exercising the rights he had always had. In Brandon Fitch's world, the weekend passed without incident. Tuesday was coming. Brandon Fitch's Tuesday started the way his Tuesdays always did. He was at his desk at Helicopt Distribution by 8:30, coffee from the lobby cafe, the kind of easy confidence that comes from believing the room already belongs to you before you walk into it. He had calls scheduled, he had meetings, he had, as far as he knew, a career that was performing exactly as it was supposed to. At 10:14 his phone rang. Internal line, compliance office. He was told to come down. The compliance officer's name was Margaret Webb, and she had the manner of a woman who had delivered bad news so many times that she had stopped trying to soften it. She asked Brandon to close the door. She told him that Halcourt's compliance department had received a formal conflict of interest disclosure notice from a vendor, Skybridge Logistics Solutions, and that the notice described a personal relationship between a Halcourt procurement employee and a principal equity holder at that vendor. She told him the disclosure had triggered a mandatory review of all procurement decisions involving Skybridge over the previous 18 months. Brandon's face did not change immediately. That was the thing about men like Brandon. The performance was so habitual that it held even when the ground was dropping out from under them. He said it was a misunderstanding. Margaret Webb looked at him the way people look at someone who has just said something that is not going to help them, and told him that his badge and laptop would need to be surrendered before he left the building. She told him he was on administrative leave, effective immediately. She told him his performance bonus, $88,000, which he had already mentally spent, was frozen pending the outcome of the review. Brandon sat in that conference room for a moment after she finished. Then he walked to the elevator, badge already gone, laptop already collected, and rode down to the parking garage alone. He called Denise from the car. He told her there had been a situation at work, that it was a misunderstanding, that somebody had filed something with compliance that was going to get cleared up quickly. He used the word misunderstanding 3 times. His voice had the particular tightness of a man who is constructing a narrative in real time and has not yet decided how much of the truth to include. Denise listened. She said she understood. She told him to come over that evening and they would figure it out together. She did not know yet what she was about to find out. At 2:47 that same afternoon, her attorney called. The call was about Raymond's divorce response filing, which had been received that Friday and which the attorney had spent the weekend reviewing. The attorney said she needed to walk Denise through the financial disclosure section. She said there were some numbers that required discussion. She told Denise that Raymond had disclosed a 34% equity stake in a company called Skybridge Logistics Solutions, currently valued at $61 million. Denise said she had never heard of it. The attorney told her Raymond was a co-founder, had been since 2003. His equity position was worth $20.7 million. Denise was quiet. She asked the attorney to repeat the number, $20.7 million. The phone line was silent long enough that the attorney asked, if she was still there. Denise said she was. She did not say anything else for a moment. The number was sitting in the air of her apartment like something that had always been there, and she was only now seeing it. The way you see a shape in the ceiling you must have looked at 1,000 times without registering. She called Miss Claudette. The call lasted 6 minutes. Miss Claudette said the right things. That the number must be wrong, that Raymond must have done something underhanded, that there was surely an explanation. But her voice had something underneath it that Denise had never heard there before. It sounded like the particular silence of a woman who has been certain of something for a long time and has just been handed a reason to wonder. The call ended without resolution. Denise called Raymond. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She did not leave a message. Brandon arrived at her apartment that evening and sat on the couch and described his situation at Helicopt in more detail. The compliance review, the administrative leave, the frozen bonus. He said Skybridge Logistics was the vendor at the center of it. He said somebody had filed a notice naming him. Denise looked at him for a long moment. She said the name Skybridge Logistics out loud, slowly, like she was hearing it for the first time in 2 different sentences on the same day and beginning to understand what that meant. Brandon asked if she knew the company. She did not answer him. She picked up her phone and called her attorney back and told her to amend the settlement filing, to revise the strategy, to do whatever needed to be done to account for what they had just found out. The attorney told her gently, carefully, in the voice of a professional delivering news that cannot be softened, that the original filing was already on record. The room was quiet, and Denise Okafor, sitting in her apartment on a Tuesday evening in Atlanta, looked at the man she had chosen instead of Raymond, and understood, perhaps for the first time and certainly too late, that she had built her entire plan on a foundation of assumptions about a man she had never actually known. The miscalculation had arrived, and it was only just getting started. Helicopt terminated Brandon Fitch on a Monday morning. No severance, no reference. A negotiated exit, which is corporate language for, "We have enough on you that you should be grateful we are letting you walk out quietly." He signed the paperwork in a conference room with no windows and was escorted to the elevator by a member of the human resources team who did not make eye contact. His parking badge still worked. That was the only thing. He called Denise from the garage. She did not pick up. The $72,000 vehicle, the one with Denise's name on the cosign, the one with 31 months left on a 36-month lease, had already missed its second payment. Brandon's frozen bonus had been the bridge that was supposed to cover it. The bridge was gone. Denise's salary as a hospital billing coordinator was $54,000 a year. After her mortgage, her own credit obligations, and basic monthly expenses, there was not enough left for a luxury car lease she had never wanted in the first place. The repossession happened on a Wednesday morning. The truck came at 7:45, before most residents had left for work. Denise was inside getting dressed when she heard it. By the time she got to the window, the vehicle was already on the flatbed. 2 of her neighbors were standing on their balconies watching. One of them had her phone out. By Thursday, Miss Claudette knew. She heard it the way she heard everything that mattered. At her salon, in the chair, under the dryer, where information moved through a community like heat through a room. Someone mentioned the name Denise Okafor. Someone mentioned a repossession. Someone else mentioned a husband, an ex-husband, and a number. $20.7 million. Miss Claudette sat very still under that dryer. By Sunday, the story had traveled through 2 congregations. It had been texted, repeated, revised slightly in the retelling, and then corrected back to the original number by someone who had seen the court filing with their own eyes. The version of Raymond that Denise's family had been building for 9 years, the man with nothing, the dead weight, the salary drawer, the one she was right to leave, was dissolving in real time in every room Denise was not in. Tamara called on Sunday afternoon. She was furious. She had told people at her job about the divorce. She had described it as her sister finally leaving the man who had never amounted to anything. She had used those exact words, never amounted to anything, to co-workers who were now sending her screenshots of the $20.7 million equity disclosure that had been filed in Fulton County Family Court. She told Denise she was embarrassed. She told Denise she could not believe she had been put in this position. She did not ask how Denise was doing. Bria did not call at all. Bria had introduced Denise to Brandon Fitch. She had presented him as a serious man with serious money and serious standing at a serious company. Every piece of that presentation had now been publicly dismantled in the most humiliating way imaginable, and Bria's response to this was to go entirely silent, the way a person goes silent when they know they have no defense and are waiting for the conversation to move to someone else. Denise filed a revised settlement demand through her attorney that same week. The new filing tried to reframe the asset picture, tried to introduce arguments about marital contribution and lifestyle maintenance and the length of the marriage. Patricia countered the same day. She filed a full asset disclosure motion. Everything Raymond owned, itemized and documented down to the LLC property in southwest Atlanta, the board position, the aviation access, the equity valuation certified by 2 independent assessors. Everything entered into public record, clean, precise, and impossible to argue with. Denise's attorney called her after receiving the counter-filing. The call was brief. The attorney said, without drama, that the revised strategy was not going to work, that the original filing had already established Raymond's position on record, that the numbers were what they were. She said Denise needed to think carefully about what outcome she was actually trying to achieve, because the one she had originally designed no longer existed. Brandon moved out of Denise's apartment 3 weeks after his termination. He said he needed space to handle his situation. He said it with the tone of a man who had already emotionally relocated to another city and was simply waiting for the logistics to catch up. He was gone by the end of the month. The mortgage lender sent a letter the same week, flagging the account due to the missed obligations connected to the co-signed vehicle. It was not a default notice, not yet, but it was the kind of letter that arrives before a default notice, the kind that tells you the timeline has started. Denise was alone in an apartment that felt like evidence. Raymond, meanwhile, was in his southwest Atlanta house on a Wednesday evening, eating a plate of baked chicken and rice he had made himself, with the gospel station playing low on the kitchen radio the way his grandmother used to keep it. He did not know the exact sequence of what was happening to Denise that week. He had not asked. He had made his decisions, filed his documents, and returned to living. He was reading the newspaper when his phone lit up with a message from Patricia. The settlement conference had been scheduled. There was one thing left, tea, and Raymond had already agreed to show up for it in person. The building that housed Meridian and Cole was 42 floors of glass and steel on Peachtree Street, the kind of address that announced itself before you walked through the door. The rooftop terrace on the 38th floor was designed for executive arrivals, a clean landing pad, a low wall of brushed steel, a view of downtown Atlanta that on a clear day stretched all the way to the tree line of the suburbs. Denise arrived 40 minutes early. She came with her attorney, a composed woman named Vanessa Osei, who had spent the past 6 weeks quietly recalibrating every legal position she had originally built. They took the elevator to the 38th floor and were shown to the terrace by a building associate who offered water and asked if they needed anything else. Denise said no, She stood near the railing and looked out at the city and did not say much. She was dressed carefully, hair done, everything in its place. The surface was intact. But Vanessa Osei, standing 2 feet away, could see the thing underneath the surface that Denise had been carrying for 6 weeks. A particular exhaustion that comes not from working hard, but from having been wrong in a way that cannot be undone. Miss Claudette was downstairs in the lobby. She had insisted on coming. She had been insisting on things since the morning this all began, the way she always had, with the authority of a woman who had always believed her certainty was the same thing as correctness. But she had been quiet lately, a different kind of quiet than her usual composure, the kind of quiet that arrives when a person is waiting to find out how wrong they were. Denise heard it before she saw it. A low rhythmic sound, distant at first, then building. The particular percussion of rotor blades cutting through warm Atlanta air. She turned from the railing. Vanessa Osei looked up. The helicopter came from the south, dropping altitude as it approached, descending with the unhurried precision of something that had done this before and had no reason to rush. It settled onto the landing pad in a wash of displaced air. The rotors slowed, the door opened, Raymond Okafor stepped out. He was wearing a dark suit, no pocket square, no tie pin, nothing ornamental. He looked exactly the same as he had looked on the porch on that Saturday morning in April. Same posture, same unhurried quality to the way he moved. He crossed the rooftop terrace toward Denise and her attorney without hurrying, the way a man crosses a room when he already knows how the conversation is going to end. He was smiling. That smile. Denise recognized it the instant she saw it. The same small private smile from the porch, the one she had demanded an explanation for and received nothing but silence. She understood it now with a completeness that felt like a physical weight settling across her shoulders. Raymond stopped a few feet away. He looked at her directly, the way he had always looked at things he was choosing to address. Fully, without performance. He said her name. Then he was quiet for a moment, looking at the woman he had been married to for 13 years, and he spoke in the measured tone of a man who had decided a long time ago that when this moment came, he would tell the truth and nothing else. He told her he remembered that morning. He told her he remembered exactly where he was standing when she walked into the kitchen. He remembered her mother in that good coat, positioned behind her like punctuation. He remembered carrying his own bags to the door. He remembered the word she used on the porch, homeless, and the particular way she said it, like a verdict she had been saving up for a long time. He told her he remembered looking up and seeing the helicopter cross the sky. He said he had been attending quarterly board meetings at Skybridge Logistics for 11 years by the time she filed that paperwork. He said he had signed the aviation acquisition resolution as a board member, not as a bystander. He said the man she had brought into her life to replace him had spent 18 months building his own professional reputation on contracts that fed directly into Raymond's equity, and had never once thought to ask who owned the company he was championing. He said all of this without anger, without performance, without raising his voice even slightly above the ambient sound of the city 38 floors below. Then he looked at her and he said it. He said, "You called me broke in front of your mother, Denise. You told me good luck being homeless. You picked a man to replace me who was spending company money to impress you, at a company I helped build before you and I ever sat down to dinner. I didn't say anything that morning because there was nothing I needed to say. I just needed you to see me arrive." The terrace was very quiet. Denise did not respond. There was no version of a response that would have been adequate to what had just been said. And she was not a woman who spoke when she had nothing to say that would help her. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face that was not quite grief and not quite shame, but lived in the neighborhood of both. Raymond held her gaze for one more second. Then he turned to Patricia Hargrove, who had followed him off the helicopter and had been standing at a precise and professional distance throughout, and he told her simply that he was ready to sign. Patricia opened the folder. Raymond signed the settlement documents on a rooftop in downtown Atlanta, while the Atlanta skyline stood witness, and the helicopter waited behind him on the pad, patient and quiet, the same way Raymond Okafor had always waited for the things he already knew were coming. Denise stared at the city. She did not watch him sign. Raymond did not take what he could have taken. That was the thing people would not fully understand, not at first, and maybe not ever. He had $20.7 million in documented equity and the legal standing to pursue a settlement that would have left Denise with nothing beyond what the court was obligated to protect. His attorney had laid out the full range of options. Raymond had listened, thanked her, and chosen the most restrained version available. He accepted a clean split of the marital assets, the house in Cascade Heights, the joint accounts, the shared property, divided down the middle according to what had been built during the marriage, nothing more. He did not pursue punitive damages. He did not file additional motions. He signed what needed to be signed, and he was done. Denise kept the house. She could not afford to keep the house. Within 3 months of the settlement, the Cascade Heights home was on the market. The mortgage obligation, combined with the flagged, co-signed debt and the absence of the income she had been counting on Brandon to provide, made the arithmetic impossible. The house sold in 7 weeks. She relocated to a 1-bedroom apartment in Decatur, smaller than anything she had lived in since her 20s, in a building where nobody knew her name or her family or the story of how she had arrived there. Brandon Fitch resurfaced briefly, not in Atlanta, but in Charlotte, where he had found contract work in supply chain consulting at a fraction of his former salary. He posted nothing on social media about Helicopt. He did not mention Skybridge. He had, by all appearances, become a man who had learned the value of not announcing himself. Miss Claudette stopped attending Greater Holiness Missionary Baptist Church sometime in the late fall. She gave no public reason. But the fellowship hall at Greater Holiness had a bronze plaque near the entrance door commemorating the women who had helped found the congregation's outreach ministry in 1962, and one of the names on that plaque was Ida Reese Okafor, Raymond's grandmother. Miss Claudette had passed that plaque every Sunday for 9 years without registering whose name was on it. When she finally understood whose name it was, she found a different church. Raymond established the Okafor Reese Aviation Scholarship through Skybridge's Community Foundation in the autumn of 2024. 2 recipients annually, children from working-class Atlanta families who had never been on a commercial aircraft, selected by a panel that included teachers, community organizers, and 1 retired freight dispatcher who had known Raymond's father. The scholarship covered not just the flight experience, but an immersive 2-day program with aviation professionals, logistics engineers, and operations specialists. It was named for his father Clifton and his grandmother Ida. Raymond had written the mission statement himself in 2 sentences without asking for help. The first awards ceremony was held at a community center in Vine City. The same neighborhood, 2 blocks from Greater Hope Baptist Church, where the basement that Skybridge had borrowed in 2003 still had the same water-stained ceiling it always had. Raymond sat in the front row and watched 2 12-year-old children receive their certificates and could not fully explain, even to himself, why that felt like the most significant thing he had done with money in his entire life. 6 months after the settlement, on a Saturday evening in October, Raymond drove himself to a fundraiser at a church hall in southwest Atlanta, a community literacy initiative, the kind of event held in rooms that smell like good food and industrial floor cleaner and the particular warmth of people who have shown up for each other for decades. He parked his own car, he wore a regular jacket, he filled his own plate from the buffet line and found an empty folding chair near the back and sat in it like a man who had nowhere more important to be. He was introduced to a woman named Adrienne by the pastor's wife, who said only that Adrienne taught at the elementary school that had been founded by Raymond's mother's congregation 30 years ago. Adrienne was in her early 40s, with the unhurried manner of a person who had made peace with the pace of her own life. She asked Raymond what he did. He told her logistics. She nodded the way people nod when an answer is sufficient, and they have no need to press further. And Raymond smiled, not the strategic smile, not the private, knowing smile that had lived inside him for 15 years, like a sealed letter waiting to be opened. This was something else entirely, a lighter thing belonging to a man who had nothing left to prove and no reason to protect himself by staying quiet. They talked for an hour, about the neighborhood, about the school, about a book she was reading that he had not heard of and planned to find. She did not ask about his net worth. He did not mention the helicopter. When the evening ended, he walked her to her car and told her he had enjoyed the conversation, and she said she had too, and that was where it stood. He drove home through southwest Atlanta with the windows down and the radio on low in the October air coming through like something that had been waiting all year to feel exactly like this. Some men announce themselves the moment they walk into a room. They need the room to know what they are worth before they say a single word, because without the announcement there is nothing to stand on. Raymond Okafor had spent 20 years building something real and 15 years saying nothing about it, and one Saturday morning carrying his own bags to a car while a woman told him good luck being homeless. He did not need to announce himself. He just needed to arrive. And now, sitting in a folding chair at a church fundraiser in southwest Atlanta, laughing at something Adrienne had said before she left, worth $20.7 million and known in this room only as the man who works in logistics and fills his own plate and stays until the end, Raymond Okafor was, for the first time in a very long time, exactly where he meant to be. Now, I want to ask you something before we close this out. If you had been Raymond, carrying what he carried, knowing what he knew, walking off that porch with those bags in your hands, what would you have done? Would you have acted sooner? Would you have taken more? Or would you have waited the way he did and let the truth do what the truth eventually always does? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear from you. If this story hit the way I think it did, please tap that like button. It is the single most powerful thing you can do to help this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this one. And if you are not subscribed yet, this is the moment. Stories like Raymond's drop here every week. I will see you in the next one.